Hi everyone, my name is Kevin Weil and I'm President of Product and Business here at Planet. Today in the studio, I have the distinct pleasure of chatting with Oliver Parker, Vice President of Google Cloud. Before joining Google Cloud in 2018, Oliver spent 18 years at Microsoft, holding leadership roles across sales, BD, and partnerships. He's been intimately involved in helping us here at Planet as we've evolved our partnership with Google. He drove a lot of the ideas supporting our work together and is someone who truly sees the long-term potential of Planet data. So, in addition to all the rest of his accomplishments, he's clearly a genius.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, first of all, for calling me a genius. It's not often that a rocket or even a satellite scientist refers to me that way, so I do appreciate it. But more importantly, it's actually good to connect in person. It's obviously been a while, and I'm definitely relishing us being in the studio together today. So thanks for having me here today, and also thanks to the audience for listening.
So, Oliver, you've been at Google Cloud for several years now. What gets you excited to come into work each day?
You know, what gets me excited is, I think, sort of the opportunity that I've gotten to be part of with Google Cloud. Like what the cloud is enabling from an opportunity standpoint, sort of things that you would never have imagined. And I think about our partnership and the boundless opportunities. That for me is sort of probably one of the first things that just gets me really excited, is honestly sort of the customer and the end user impact of the stuff that we get to play a part of from an ecosystem, from an enablement standpoint. And then honestly, there's sort of the deep partnerships that we're starting to build with our clients, like you and I sitting here today. So sort of what we get to enable and be part of from something a lot bigger than us, as well as honestly the proximity and the partnerships that we get to create. So those are sort of two of the things that are super important. And then, you know, for the same reason that I came here, sort of whatever it was, almost 3 years ago, just the mission of Google in terms of making, you know, organizing the world's information and making it accessible and useful. Those are two really important parts, and I think very much speaks to the technologies that we're bringing together to enable our mutual customer base. So I'm sure I'll talk a little bit about that later.
If you think about the cloud today, I imagine a lot of the audience is already using a cloud platform today, and the folks that aren't are probably considering moving to one. The competition, as someone from the outside, is pretty fierce, right? Between Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and some of the other players, you have billions of dollars being spent every year. How should folks in the audience think about the different platforms? You know, what makes them different? And of course, why do you believe GCP is the best choice?
Well, I'm not going to give a biased perspective to start off with, but
sure.
there's a few points that I think are really important. I think each of us are making each other better as it relates to our technologies and the implementation and the use of our technologies. I also think that the way the cloud is evolving, you know, while there's three sort of very obvious hyperscalers, the use of multi-cloud is becoming so important to many clients, whether that's by design or it's just sort of happening that way. You'll see this especially in larger companies where it sort of ends up almost use case and workload driven depending on what cloud or even engineering background in terms of which clouds they go build to. So I think one of the things for us that's super important that we believe is a big differentiation is really sort of creating an open ecosystem in terms of thinking about data. And we've built products like Anthos and BQ where we're accessing other cloud providers' data. We think sort of the future is very much in sort of the interoperability within clouds. And we're building products, and I think very much is our history from an open source standpoint. So we think over time sort of the perspective of open cloud systems and closed cloud systems will start to play out. We think it already is, but we're very much betting on an open ecosystem and interoperability with other clouds. But at the same time, I think, you know, from a results standpoint that you may have seen in the news, we continue to grow exponentially, at least relative to the other cloud providers. But we feel very good about the opportunity. And then finally, we still think it's very early in terms of what the cloud can enable, especially when you get into things like artificial intelligence, where we believe we have differentiated products and solutions and, quite frankly, a rich history.
Yeah, and I mean, that kind of open approach resonates a lot and feels very googly to me. So it feels like a very natural approach for you guys to take.
I almost wonder whether you actually worked here. I know you didn't, but you're definitely speaking our language, so it's great.
So if we go into the data now, I think we can agree satellite data is an incredibly powerful data set, but at least in my view, it's not yet reaching the industries where it can have the impact that we know it can over the long run. And I'd be curious for your view on what it's going to take to make that happen.
I think, and having spent now sort of a year plus working with Planet, these are some of the things that I think we were thinking of as we were sort of looking at sort of the next iteration of our partnership. I think there's a couple of areas that I think of when I think about sort of how we broaden or sort of democratize more of what you're doing, and I say it from a partnership standpoint. If we start with access, and you think about the institutions that have typically leveraged the data that you're building and working with GCP, it's predominantly been governmental institutions. But I think there's so much more that this can enable. I know you're doing a significant amount with the agricultural side, but then you could start to think about use cases with CPG, with financial services, and you get into the sustainability conversation. So I think part of it is sort of where a lot of this data started. And I think second of all, it's really about us jointly educating the market, and also with sort of such critical initiatives like sustainability, the importance of the data that you're building and the ability to consume it in a meaningful way becomes so much more valuable. And I think, we've reduced the burden of a lot of the economic hurdles that probably stood in the way earlier on. So yeah, I feel very, very bullish about those two things sort of basically not becoming hurdles to sort of mass consumption of basically the planetary data that you're building and sort of what we can provide from an analytics, from an access standpoint.
Mm-hmm. And how is Google looking at evolving its solution set to integrate geospatial and satellite data as one step in making all of this easier?
We're going to be announcing Earth Engine availability actually as a primary Google Cloud service, which is super exciting in terms of that coming into the family of overall Google Cloud services. And what's super exciting about that platform and that tool is it's basically now sort of seeking to use space data to solve some key business challenges. And if you sort of thread the needle a little bit on that, per my previous point about access and awareness, it's sort of setting a prime example of sort of the ability to take the location data in a Google wrapper and apply it to something very meaningful. I mentioned CPG earlier. One of the use cases and one of the companies that we're working with, I think we're jointly working with, they obviously CPG has often been at the forefront and at times been sort of a laggard around sustainability. It's a business that requires significant investments in sustainability to get much more progressive. There's an example where we're working with a mutual client where they're working directly with farmers. Now, the cost of sustainability to do sustainable farming for some of these raw materials is incredibly high. So between our partnership, our collective partnership, and the CPG clients, they're actually able to help the farmers in a more meaningful way, be more sustainable in what they're doing. So right at the very beginning of the supply chain, the work that you're doing from a data standpoint, wrapped in Google Earth Engine, is actually enabling them to produce sustainably right the way through the value chain. So sort of the applicability and the use cases, I think, is just at the beginning in terms of the kinds of things that we can do.
Mm-hmm. I think even though we're recording this virtually, I think I heard a cheer at the beginning of your answer there when you announced Google Earth Engine's deeper integration and adoption into the overall Google Cloud product. We do a lot of work with our data to make sure that there's a clean, easy, automatic integration into Google Earth Engine. And we have lots of customers as well as our academic and research community that do great work within Google Earth Engine. So I know you just made a bunch of people happy.
Well, I probably glossed over the excitement, quite frankly, from the cheering from some of our engineering teams at the same time, that I think are very excited for two reasons. One is I think it's just deepening the partnership and the applicability, as well as it being a core service. And with the amount of people that are now starting to consume GCP, we think that opens up significant markets as well.
Yeah, and so I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into the product itself now. So at Planet, our sweet spot's high-frequency, planetary-scale Earth observation data. We operate the world's largest Earth observation satellite constellation, and it can be a bit of a fire hose of information. So how do you see our data fitting with Google products like BigQuery?
Thank you for, again, speaking my language of BigQuery. So let me just sort of take a little bit of a step back. I think I mentioned in our opening comments sort of what excites me is the mission statement from Google in terms of organizing the world's information and making it universally accessible and useful. That is so resonant when you start to think about what you just asked. And so, by the way, just for the viewers, BigQuery is our at-scale data warehousing and analytics platform. I know a lot about it. I won't necessarily go into the details of it, but the net of it is that really becomes sort of the organization system for so much of the data, to your point, in the fire hose. So we're very excited around, just at a core technology level, the ability to consume and analyze that data, especially in light of the frequency that you're now processing it through Google. We think sort of access and real-time access in the data, especially as you're circling the earth sort of daily with all these images. We think that the combination of that data with a product like BigQuery opens up phenomenal opportunities, as well as the accessibility that we see many customers enjoy, which is why that platform is growing at such a great pace for us.
I mean, speaking as a former engineer, 10 years ago, I was working on building analytics products like BigQuery, and we were blown away by what it could do 10 years ago. So it's exciting to see how it's evolved and scaled since. And so I have one more question for you, and maybe I'll kind of broaden it out and talk about sustainability in the industry more generally. Google has ambitious carbon and sustainability commitments, and this notion of a clean cloud is gaining traction. So what's the response been from customers, and how do you see Planet data actually being a potential value add to Google on this front?
So, from a customer standpoint, if I just think about my client conversations over the last year, there's sort of an increasing drumbeat of dialogue around it. From the sort of hey, can you share with us some of your sustainability metrics, or your whatever metrics we're using to sort of measure it? So it's becoming very much part of a lot of our client conversations, sort of first of all, which is, personally, I think it's great that it is, because I do think it's such an important sort of societal imperative. As it relates to us, first off, I think this has been a big part of Google Cloud, and sort of, again, one of the reasons why, quite frankly, I joined it, because of its commitment to sustainability. And this has been a journey that we've been on for a significant period of time, from a neutrality standpoint, from a renewable energy standpoint. If you actually start to sort of, and then obviously from a Planet standpoint, I think this opens up significant opportunity. So just from a Google standpoint, we've engineered sustainability almost to the design point within our platforms. So from a sustainability standpoint, like for instance, when you run Google Workspace, every email you send is carbon neutral, because we have painstakingly sought to design, build, and honestly operate our data centers in a sustainable way. And when you have data centers that can be larger than 300 US football fields, that takes some serious engineering.
Yeah, so I mean, it's powerful when you consider the combination of geospatial data and a clean cloud. For example, more than 5,000 users are now accessing Planet's base maps over countries within Google Earth Engine to pioneer efforts to reduce and reverse forest loss. Those users can now feel good, because of the clean cloud that they're building on top of, about the analyses that they're doing, and that the apps that they're building will have lower ultimate carbon impacts.
I mean, that's just, that's amazing to hear, in terms of sort of the power of data, what you're building, and sort of how our platforms come together. And it's a lot of, I feel like a broken record, but I just think the opportunity is endless, and the accessibility and the awareness that's really on us is going to do some really, really cool things. So with that, I'm now going to take the mic.
Okay.
And I get to ask you a couple of questions, and then we'll probably call it a wrap.
All right.
So first off, what excites you about our partnership, and sort of in light of your history in the technology sector, give me the context of that partnership as it relates to other cloud hyperscalers, but more importantly, sort of how will you think about partnership?
So, I mean, one of the things that makes me excited about the future in general, Planet's future, Google's future, the future of what our customers can do through this partnership, is just how easy cloud providers like Google make building technology. Now, I'll give you an example. I spent 7 years at Twitter, and during that time, we went from a small company of 40 people to a company of over 4,000. And we were renting space. There was no cloud really back then, so we were renting space in a colo, racking our own hardware, dealing with hard drive failures, all that painful stuff that you have to manage when you do it yourself. And worse, we were growing quickly, so we were trying to order hardware to stay ahead, but we didn't have tons of money, so we were always nervous that growth would slow, and then we'd have ordered too much hardware and overspent, and just 100 other problems. Not to mention that we had a ton of our engineering team building infrastructure, rebuilding infrastructure, frankly, that companies like Google had built and perfected years before. And so the exciting thing is now with the cloud, that like nobody ever has to do that again. And I think even Twitter moved to GCP. And so what that means ultimately is for every company, Planet included, our customers included, we can now spend R&D time and money focused on the things that are unique to our business. You take care of storage and compute, we don't have to worry about that anymore. And we can even leverage some of the higher level services like AI tools that the cloud providers like you have built. And ultimately, our customers get faster access to better data. They turn that into business value more quickly. And the cloud has shortened the iteration cycle for everybody. And that means we can build more for our customers and everybody wins.
That's awesome. Great perspective. And I'm not going to comment on our relationship with Twitter, but I will say that their feeds and their ad relevancy are definitely getting better. So they may be using some Google out there somewhere. But more importantly, it's great to hear your statements around sort of the focus on data and imagery that I think this enables for you versus having to manage infrastructure. When you start to think about what the engineering teams are doing, obviously from a cloud standpoint, our job is obviously to let the engineers develop great products, not necessarily manage infrastructure and a lot of the sort of the enabling tooling systems that have, to your point, you were doing obviously, some time back at Twitter. So on to my next question. So when you think about Planet's role in helping people harness that data for the good, and then you sort of evolve that into sort of the finished product for consumption, how are you and sort of the rest of the team at Planet sort of evolving to accelerate a more solutions-oriented approach for yourself as well as with the broader ecosystem?
Yeah, so I've been at Planet now about 6 months, and before I came from outside the space industry. So honestly, the more that I learn about everything that has gone into building Planet, the more respect I have for what Will and Robbie, our co-founders, have accomplished in just getting the business to where it is today. Space is really hard. Satellites are hard, and they did something that nobody thought was possible. They built little 5-kilogram satellites that are the size of a shoebox. They put 200 of them in orbit. Actually, 200 of them are in orbit today. We've launched over 450 satellites over the life of the company. And we now have an image of the entire Earth every single day. But here we are. It worked. And now there's a real opportunity to use this data to help our customers change the world. And that's why I'm so excited to be here working for Planet and working for our customers every day. And the way that we do that is we have to simplify the data set. We have a unique data set, but we need to simplify it so that our customers can get value from it more quickly. If you look today, a lot of our customers are very sophisticated from a geospatial perspective, and they're happy and they're very capable working with raw data. But if you fast forward a few years, that won't be true. We'll still have those customers, but there are going to be a lot of customers who don't want to ever start with a pixel. And with our roadmap, the opportunity is simplifying and extracting insights from this data. We want to help customers realize that they need this data. The world is better. They can do better things. They can build more sustainably with this data because you can't measure what you can't manage. We can be ground truth to so many different industries, but we have to make it easier. So I see our data across every industry from defense to civil government to agriculture to forestry to sustainability and beyond being used for real good, to feed more people, to better support their people's constituents, to mitigate climate impact, to save lives. And our opportunity is to simplify it so that happens more quickly and more easily across everybody we serve.
And this isn't cliche, that's super profound in terms of how I think we sort of have a level of alignment in terms of things we're trying to achieve. And by the way, I don't know whether you know, but we both have in our mission statements for our respective companies, accessibility in the statement. I think there's a strong cultural alignment as well as sort of a societal alignment that I think we both have. So this has been a really good conversation for me. I know we're probably literally figuratively probably going to be asked to leave the studio soon. But it's been great chatting with you today, and thank you, and thanks to the audience, and I'll hand it over to you to close us out.
Yeah, thank you so much, Oliver. It's really been a pleasure having you here at Planet Explore with us. We're incredibly excited by what we're building at Planet, and it's very clear we couldn't do it without the partnership that we have with you and the Google team. So thank you so much, and thank you for joining us.